Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum tonight. We have present are Ms. Deidre Trask, Mr. Michael Bird, and Mr. Terry Rogers. We are expecting possibly one more member, and he'll be here hopefully shortly. If not, we do have a quorum to proceed. The first case we have, on the docket tonight is a detailed site plan regarding Retail Village East at Melford Town Center. The proposed application is a request, or actually I don't have to read this, I take that back. So detailed site plan for Retail Village East at Melford Town Center. Mr. Stevens?
Thank you and good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. For the record, Frank Stevens from the city planning staff, here tonight to review with you a detailed site plan for Retail Village East at Melford Town Center. The purposes of a detailed site plan are to review parking and building design, building architecture, landscaping, lighting, signage, service areas, loading and unloading spaces, and things of that nature. We're not here to talk about transportation, APF issues, or anything like that. The zoning for this property, MXT, mixed-use transportation-oriented, allows this use. It encourages a mix of uses in that zone on properties that are located near a major intersection or interchange, as this one is. The MXT encourages a mix of residential, retail, and office and employment uses, which this project does. So there are no issues regarding the use of this particular property. The City Council will be reviewing this case on Monday night, the 19th. This first slide is attachment A in the report, and it's in here to give you an idea of the general location of the Melford community. North is to the top of the page. At the bottom is U.S. Routes 50 and 301, and over to the west, to the left, is Maryland Route 3. Bel Air Drive comes into the property, becomes Melford Boulevard, and kind of snakes through the property in an east-west direction like this. The property we're talking about tonight is about 6.3 acres in area, and it's in this location right here. To the immediate east of the DSP tonight is the Melford House. To the south is the U.S. Census Building on the other side of Melford Boulevard. The two existing four-story office buildings are located over here to the west a little bit. This is Science Drive in this location, and under construction on this particular lot is the first of 3 Marriott hotel properties. The second slide is attachment 3 in our report, and this is the detailed site plan that we're going to be talking about tonight. Melford Boulevard is located down here. The new road, East-West Boulevard, will be constructed during the construction of the build-out of the Melford Town Center, and that runs in this alignment right here. There's a new public road on the eastern side of the property. It's referred to in the plan as Road B for the time being. It runs kind of north-south and connects East-West Boulevard and Melford Boulevard. And just off to the east of Road B is the Melford House. There are 5 buildings proposed under this detailed site plan of various areas. The first building is referred to as Building 1 in this location in the northeastern quadrant of the East-West Boulevard, Melford Boulevard intersection. Next to that is Building B. Both of these buildings are about 6,500 square feet each in area. Continuing around, up here is Building 3, which fronts on East-West Boulevard, as do Buildings 1 and 2. Building 4 is on the north side of East-West Boulevard. It's about 11,500 square feet, has its own parking area to the east. And then Building 5 is down here along the north side of Melford Boulevard. There's parking provided in a central parking lot around which the 4 of the 5 buildings are located. There is on-street parking provided as well, about 22 spaces along East-West Boulevard, and I believe there are 20 spaces along Road B. There is right to the immediate west of Building 3, a small plaza sitting landscaped area in this location. Across Melford Boulevard is a location for a small pavilion building. There is a trail and there's also a sidewalk that connects this pavilion in this alignment down here, down to the existing trail around the city's stormwater management pond. Sidewalks are provided on both sides of Road B and both sides of East-West Boulevard. The applicant is proposing several crosswalks for connectivity between the city-owned property here and Building 4 and the proposed retail commercial uses on the south side of East-West Boulevard, as well as providing crosswalks at what will become a 4-way intersection. Right now, there's nothing here at the intersection of this future intersection of East-West Boulevard, Melford, and Tesla Drive. We are recommending that all of the crosswalks in the public rights-of-way be installed with contrasting colored brick pavers. We talk about that on pages 8 and 9 in our staff report. There are several of them located throughout the project along East-West Boulevard and Road B. We're also recommending, for various reasons that we describe and outline in our report, that 3 intersections be constructed fully of contrasting colored brick pavers, and those are at the intersection of Road B and East-West Boulevard, at the intersection of East-West Boulevard and the driveway leading into the parking area between Buildings 3 and 2, and there's a crosswalk that's provided in this location between Buildings 1 and 2 that we're recommending be constructed completely of color contrasting brick pavers. The next, this attachment and the next 2 are attachments regarding the architecture of 3 of the 5 proposed buildings, Buildings 1, 2, and 3. Buildings 1 and 2 are identical in nature. They're 1-story with the appearance of a second story, which is kind of a false story. This first elevation faces East-West Boulevard, and the elevation facing the parking lot is almost a mirror image of it. These 2 elevations also face Building 2 and also the corner. And this is Building 2. Again, the elevation faces Northwest Boulevard, the parking lot, and the 2 end elevations. These buildings will be constructed of 2 colors of brick, ephes material, storefront window, aluminum materials. Canopies are proposed above the windows and above the doorways. Attachment 4C is includes the elevations for Building 3. This is the longest building of the 3 buildings. Again, this is the elevation that faces East-West Boulevard, and the long one down here faces the interior parking lot with the 2 end elevations here. Same materials as proposed on Buildings 1 and 2. Attachments 5A and 5B are the landscaping plan. Again, to orient you to the property, this is East-West Boulevard through the site, buildings 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and Road B. The landscaping that's provided is very high-quality, detailed materials. The plaza area, the sitting area right here is proposed to be landscaped. These shaded areas on the ends of buildings 1, 2, and 3 are kind of outdoor sitting areas or possible restaurant, outdoor dining areas, kind of a pedestrian activity area on the ends of these buildings here. You can see the walkway that leads between buildings 1 and 2 from across the street between these two and into the parking lot. And the landscaping also includes activity that's proposed, excuse me, on the north side of East-West Boulevard and adjacent to the Melford Cemetery, which is located here. Attachment 6 is included for two reasons. It provides a detail of the proposed street lighting throughout the project along the public streets within the DSP area. And it also shows a brick wall with signage on it, which is located at this intersection here. There's a brick wall that's proposed on each side of this intersection. Well, on the northeast and the northwest sides of the intersection with this particular detail here. There are other signs proposed throughout the project, mostly building-mounted signs, window signs, canopy features, and things of that nature. We talk about them on pages 12 and 13 in our report, but the details provided in Attachment 7 show more clearly what's envisioned to happen on this property in terms of signage. We also mentioned on pages 13 and 14 stormwater management and woodland conservation, and lastly conformance with the master plan. And based on the requirements of the master plan and the zoning ordinance, which we've discussed on page 14 in our report, we believe that the proposed development conforms to the area master plan. We're recommending approval of this detailed site plan with several conditions that are discussed on pages 14 through 17. And there is one change we'd like to make, and that is to the condition number 2A regarding parking, about the identification of compact spaces. We'd like to include the dimensions of compact spaces in that condition, which would be 16.5 feet by 8 feet. So compact spaces that are with dimensions of 8 feet by 16.5 feet shall be marked in the field with a C on the pavement surface of each space. So with that concludes the staff presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Trask?
Mr. Stevens, you spoke of a pavilion area. You spoke of a pavilion area?
Yes, the pavilion, is proposed right here. It's proposed to contain, just a group of tables and chairs.
Is that on the other side of the street from the retail center?
It's part of the retail center, but it is on the northwest side of East-West Boulevard in this location. It kind of overlooks, this is elevated right here, and it overlooks the stormwater pond.
Okay.
So it's a nice area to kind of, sit and look out.
Is that a proposed crosswalk? So there's a crosswalk?
There are crosswalks here one and here.
Right.
And 2 over here. And then there are crosswalks up and down Road B.
And that particular crosswalk would lead to the pavilion area overlooking the stormwater management?
Yes, this one does, that's right.
Okay. How big is that pavilion area roughly?
Good question. It may be, I don't know, 20 by 40.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you, Mr. Stevens. With the, go ahead, Ms. Trask. Go ahead.
Mr. Stevens, in the conditions for parking, on, what page am I on? Page 14 in the report, you say all compact parking spaces will be marked in their field with a C on the pavement. Is there going to be any signage explaining what that C means? I don't know that that's immediately intuitive that the C stands for compact.
We could refine that to make that, clearer. But we do have the dimensions noted in an amended condition of 16 and a half feet by 8 feet.
Mhm. I would still try to squeeze it.
Actually, there's the potential of, those compact spaces are proposed in this area here on the parcel of Building 4, which will be the subject of another detailed site plan.
Okay.
So there may be an opportunity between now and then for those spaces to become something larger than compact spaces, and there might not be a need for that.
Okay.
But if that's not the case, then perhaps, signage just at the end of each row identifying that their compact spaces could be located. But we'll look at that when this comes back through again.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Stevens, thanks for the good report. Were there any outstanding issues from the stakeholders meeting? I'm reading the questions that were raised, and they appear to have been all addressed adequately. Is there anything that you're aware of that was not addressed?
No, actually, no, there was I think everything's been addressed. We haven't received any calls or complaints since the meeting on February 27th about any issues that came up at that time. So I think everything's been addressed.
Okay, thank you.
All right. No other questions with staff. If the applicant would like to please come up and introduce yourself. Good evening, sir.
Evening. The record, my name is Robert Antonetti, the law firm of Shipley and Horn. It's a pleasure to be before you tonight. Here on behalf of St. John Properties, the applicant for the detailed site plan for the Retail Village East. As you probably know the team as well as I do, from St. John, we do have Andrew Rao, the regional partner, Mr. Ken Finley, development manager, and Jen Hearn, development coordinator, all with St. John Properties. We also have the applicant's partner, Representative Mike Carruthers from Somerset Construction, from Bignell Watkins Hasser, the architects, who I'll ask them to come up and give a presentation on the actual architectural elevations to give you a flavor of that. We have Rich Luschke and Nee Paul here to give a brief orientation on that after I conclude my statement. And from Bowler Engineering, last but not least, we have our civil engineers and landscape architects, Chris Rizzi and Nick Speech. Nick's going to help me with a little bit of slideshow here if we can get it loaded. So I do want to thank Mr. Stevens for his review, his comments. It's very complete and a very thorough job as always. And we always welcome the opportunity to interact with the planning department and go through the city process. We did have a stakeholders meeting. We had about a dozen people or so that attended, and we did our best to try and address all the questions that were raised, and hopefully that as thoroughly as possible. Similarly, tonight we'll be available for any questions or comments that you may have. As Frank mentioned, this is a detailed site plan. This is the third detailed site plan for the Melford Town Center. The first one was for infrastructure. The second one was for the Aspen residential building, which is in process with Prince George's County. So it's down, ready to go through their process. But pursuant to the covenants which control this property, we need to submit all detailed site plans first through the city process and receive approval before we file with the county. So the next successive detailed site plan is the Retail Village East. I call it the Retail Village East because there's also a companion retail component on the west side of Melford Boulevard, which will be shown in a future detailed site plan. Tonight, we've gone over the history of the conceptual site plan. You're aware of that. You've recommended approval of that, the preliminary plan of subdivision. All these uses, all these quantities of uses are in line with those previous foundational approvals. Tonight, we have 6.32 acres of MXT zone land, and we're proposing 5 buildings, as Mr. Stevens stated. Buildings 1, 2, and 3 are going to be spec-built retail buildings, and the architecture will be gone over in a couple minutes. Buildings 4 and 5, that would be the most, 4 is the most northern building, which is the restaurant building leading across the street, across the east-west boulevard, and the most southern building, which is a 21,400 square foot building. That's hopefully going to be the location of a future local food store, a small food store for the residents, population, workers in the community. Given that those are specific type users, i.e. a restaurant or a food store, we're not showing architecture for them today. Those are going to be purpose-built buildings for end users. When those end users are identified, and that process will begin, I guess, when we get further along in the planning process with this detailed site plan and through the county process, we will have to come in with an amendment. We'll come back before you. We'll show you what the elevations of those buildings will look like. But we feel that they'll be of similar style, quality, massing, scale of what other buildings in this Retail Village East will be proposing. So I do want to call up Rich to give a quick orientation. Nick, if you could just advance through a few of the slides here. Again, this is an illustrative plan which was approved as part of the preliminary plan of subdivision. Just for orientation, it does show the area outlined in red is the Retail Village East. So the buildings identified there are essentially the buildings we're proposing today in the detailed site plan. The blue line to the west is the future Retail Village West, and that's going to be a future detailed site plan to be determined to come in and show some more additional retail. Go to the next slide, please. Again, this is just a snapshot. I think Frank's exhibits did an excellent job showing the plan sheets, the black and white sheets of the detailed site plan. This really is an engineering exercise to show how the buildings lay out, how the parking and circulation work, and how the elevations of the buildings from an architectural standpoint look and relate to the site. If we can go to the next. There's a rendered plan of what it would look like with trees and some color added to it. As you can see, as you enter into the project, you have multiple street plantings. There are wall elements announcing that you're entering into the Melford Town Center. There's also ample opportunities for pedestrian interaction along the street, crossing the street. There's multiple street crossings. As Mr. Stevens mentioned, there is a condition talking about having the 2 crosswalk areas completely done in brick pavers. We have a different take on that, and we were going to recommend an alternative condition. I'd like to show all that to you after the architects come up, but those would be the 2 areas that we would have a bit of a conversation about and see what the pleasure of the board would be in terms of moving this forward. We go to the next slide, please. So this is the opening slide of a perspective of what the Retail Village East will look like. At this point, I want to bring Rich up from Bignell Watkins Hasser and just to kind of walk you through quickly and orient you as to the architecture, the styling, and really what the feel of this new retail component is going to be like. So with that, I will call Rich up and then we'll continue. Thank you.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. For the record, I'm Rich Luschke with Bignell Watkins Hatcher Architects. And I'd like to explain, as Rob said, in a little more detail what's happening with this site plan. So our retail village is, as Frank described, 5 different buildings. We tried to keep the footprints relatively small. The total square footage is 58,000 square feet among these 5 buildings. And we grouped them in such a way to provide view corridors in multiple directions, overlooking the pond, back towards the Melford house. Good visibility to what we're calling the promenade on the west and north side of East-West Boulevard. And we'll talk a little bit more about the pavilion and how it makes the connection to the pond from the retail village. There are lots of outdoor hardscape spaces. You'll see that in a little bit more detail with some of the renderings. Buildings 1, 2, and 3, as Rob said, are the first phase of this, and each one has an outdoor space basically at each end of the building, with the main space really being to the west of building number 3, adjacent to the largest crosswalk that you see on the plan. So if you could go to the next one. So now we're at East-West Boulevard and Melford Boulevard at that intersection. You can see the project identification signs. The one on the left has the name. The one on the right is just the name of the project is just out of the picture. But that's building 1, the first building, and then you can see a gap further down. We're kind of calling that the Muse, that connects from the interior parking lot across East-West Boulevard to the promenade. So the promenade is a wide sidewalk, very pedestrian friendly. We've got lots of landscaping. There's a median dividing traffic, street lighting and street furniture. Next. So as we're moving north along East-West Boulevard, the first break in the buildings, this is the view from an overlook terrace, basically, looking back towards the building. So you can see the wide crosswalk. You can see the Muse there where the tables with the umbrellas are. So there's opportunities for the tenants to have outdoor seating, a very strong connection. You can see the parking beyond. You can also see on-street parking at East-West Boulevard. We're connecting the buildings with some Tivoli lighting, and I'll introduce Paul to talk a little bit more detail about that later. Just to the left of this view, you can see a brick pier with a lantern on top of it and a metal rail. That's basically the edge of this promenade. So one edge is this rail and brick pier construction, and the other edge is the curb along East-West Boulevard. Lots of landscaping, street furniture, lighting. Next slide. So now we've moved further down East-West Boulevard to the next crosswalk. So we're looking back towards Melford Boulevard. And the pavilion is on the right side, and that pavilion is 20 by 20, the roof area. The columns set in a little bit. The plan is a little bit smaller, but 20 foot by 20 foot is the covered area. You can see a little bit better here the way the brick piers and the metal rail create this edge, in this view, the right-hand side of the promenade. Next. Now we're sort of almost in the same place, but spinning around, looking back down East-West Boulevard. The main building you see is Building 3. It has a very large hardscape area with some built-in seating. Another opportunity for the tenant, the end cap tenant of that building, to have outdoor seating. 2 wide crosswalks connecting, and you can see the edge of this pavilion on the left of that rendering, and then Building 4 in the background. And this is where the road once you get past this crosswalk, is where the road curves to the east and goes towards the Aspen. Next. Now we're back at the pavilion, spinning around, looking back out towards Melford Boulevard, and this is where the connection is made to the path around the pond. So this first piece of it is an ADA compliant sidewalk, and you get to a landing and you have a choice. You can either keep going and connect with the path in the distance, that's sort of curvilinear path, which would connect to the pond right there in the corner where the bicyclist is. Or you can make a U-turn and go down the steps and get there more quickly, down to the sidewalk or the path around the lake. With that, I'll introduce Paul, my partner, to talk in a little more detail about the architecture. Are there any questions about anything I have? Thank you.
Not yet. Thank you. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Paul, and I'm Director of Design for the firm, and I'm very happy to share with you some of the design work that we have. So the first thing that the 3 or 4 points that were the main driving ideas behind the building. And the first idea was in relating to the Melford house. Our intent was not to do something that would copy history. It was just to create a tone that would be respectful of it, sort of be in harmony with it, and would be a good fit. And so the way we've done that is pick on the colors and the texture and the form. And so one of the main things with that is we're using brick that would be similar to the house. And Georgian architecture basically has 2 tones to it anyway, the trim and the brick field. And so we've done that in a way that is somewhat respectful and hopefully will be in harmony with it. The second point is that the building, all the buildings are 4-sided in nature. And you can see that from all the elevations, frankly, where there is no rear treatment or side treatment. Everything, all the details carry all the way around the building. The challenge for us is to make sure that we blend the service elements and the screening items. But overall, I think it creates good architecture from every vantage point you see the building. It's got treatment all the way around. And you can see from this 4 elevations that we've got storefront on all sides of the building. And so the storefront and the doors will be the same character all the way around. One interesting feature we have is that it does represent itself as a 2-story building. The good thing about that is, as you'll see in the other perspectives, it is a good scale to it, but at the same time it does screen the rooftop units, so it does have aesthetic and practical aspects to it. And I think it gives a nice form to the building. And also the entrances allow on the street side as well as the parking lot side. I think that's always an issue with retail, is what's the entry side, and I think that's what's nice about these buildings is it incorporates all that all the way around. So I'll take you through some more images of it. You can see these are the elevations of building 2, and it's the same idea. It carries all the way through. It's somewhat consistent, and the tone of it is right, I think, in terms of relationship with the Melford house. Next. Same idea with building 3. I'll go to the next slide, please. So this view, you could tell part of the idea that I was talking about in terms of the 2-story nature of the building. And the thing that works with retail, why I like this sort of approach, is that the signage is not at the very top of the building. It's sort of in the middle, 3rd range of it. And what really ends up being your visual vista is the punched openings and the cornice, which I think just presents itself as a nice scale to it. And you can see from this, the way it fills with the tree canopies, there's a nice scale to it, and I think it works pretty well. Next. One of the things I would try to do with outdoor spaces is to not just have space that just sort of happened. Try to make sure that each space has a reason and purpose, give it some purpose. And so one of the things we try to do with corners of the building is to make that into a nice pedestrian place where people can sit. And in this case, this is the first corner of the building, and it's an outdoor plaza. And then, it's got nice architectural treatment at the end there to make it work. Next. This view shows, you've seen this view before, but what I wanted to point out with this was we're picking up on some of the color of the Melford house. The metal color on the pavilion relates to the house, so that there's a little bit of back and forth here and there. Next. So this view, what's interesting with this is when I said the outdoor spaces, this is a space in between the building naturally would be a walkway space, but I think we try to do a little bit more with it. We create a node in there. And it's not just what's happening on the ground level, it's also the fact that the storefront turns around the corner, which I think creates opportunities for the tenants to do outdoor seating. If it's a restaurant, makes it really nice and makes it work. And then with lighting, I think it adds nice character to the center. Again, you can see how the storefront turns around the corner, and we'll do the best we can to make sure that the heights of the building don't change dramatically. Keeps that character all the way around. Next. And what's hard to tell from the elevations is the fact that the building does step back and forth, which I think really helps. When you're on the sidewalk and you're walking, your experience just feels the undulation on the facade really does help to not have something that's just really flat. So I think we try to do that with this. Thanks. Again, this shows you a view from the lake, and it points to what I was talking about in terms of the form and the scale. The two-story nature of the building, I think, is the right scale for this. Next. And this just shows you a nighttime view of how we intend to animate that, make the windows look as real as possible, and with nice lighting, make the place as interesting as we can. And so that's the story. I know you'll have questions, but we'll be available.
Any questions? Yes.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think I got lost in the sauce a little bit.
Okay.
What's the rationale? So you said the buildings are two-story fill. Are they actually 2 stories?
No, it's a
No.
one-story building.
Okay.
Right, it's a one-story building. But the scale will be. You see where the sign says "perfect cut." Naturally, the building would end 2 feet above that. That's a natural place for a one-story building.
Okay.
But it just creates a really low building. I think that's, and you can see the rooftop units in that sort of case.
Okay.
And that's what this does. It sort of shields that, gives you good scale, and helps the architecture.
Okay. So that's basically for aesthetic looks.
Yes.
No functionality whatsoever,
Besides
other than maybe to help with signage.
Right.
Okay.
And screening of rooftop units.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Any other questions? Ms. Trask?
Thank you.
Oh, hang on.
I'm sorry, Mr. Paul.
Oh, okay.
You were describing the treatments as being 4-sided. Is that, so it's going to be retail, all around different retail? Or
Well, the way the building is, so the tenant that takes the space is actually from front to back. So the key thing for us is to make sure that we're using brick all the way around, as opposed to brick and then change the material because we're quote-unquote the rear. I think what this does, you can see from those elevations, it's the same treatment from the cornice to the body of the building to the storefront to the base. It goes all the way around the building.
Okay. And then you mentioned capturing the color of the Melford house.
Right.
Is it visible from this project?
Well, no, but I think that our intent is to respect, and the best way to do that is to pull from the texture and the colors of the building.
Okay.
And so, even though we don't have a brick specified here, the idea would be to pick brick that is similar to that brick. It's hard to match build brick that's been there for a long time, but we can do our best to be in harmony with it. So that's-
Okay. Thank you.
I have one more question. Mr. Paul.
Sure.
So with the architecture set up the way it is, and you said 4-sided ingress egress. So in essence, from either side, if it's a standalone structure, it's going to look similar whether in the north, south, east, west.
Right.
What's the plan for, and maybe this is directed to another individual of the team, but what's the plan for loading, unloading, merchandise, products, so on and so forth? And then, if that's the case, will you have a designated area for whichever building, whether it's building 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, will you have a designated area for loading and unloading of merchandise so that it's not impeding the foot traffic and or the vehicle traffic on the other side or the other three sides of the building?
Right. Well, in our experience, these tenants are not, tenants that need huge loading spaces or dedicated loading spaces. They actually can load right from their front doors in most instances. And so I think this gives them the flexibility to be able to load from whichever way it is. But we found that to work actually in other buildings that we've done. And
What other buildings? What other projects have you done that has the same kind of concept?
So we've done a building, well, I can name something that we've done as architects. In Montgomery County, there's a project called Falls Grove that has architecture in front and architecture in the back, similar to this, brick on all sides of it, and it has doors in front and doors at the back as well. And those tenants they don't need dedicated loading spaces because they're 1,200 square feet,
Gotcha.
2,000 square foot tenants. They just don't need those kind of loading
Right,
docks.
exactly.
Like
Okay.
you would with a food store that needs, it's an 18-wheeler, you need dedicated loading doors and all that. And, so,
All right, thank you, sir.
all right, sure.
If you can slide back to page 20, if you can go one page back. In the middle there, are those steps or is that a ramp? Right in the middle. Those are steps? Okay,
Steps.
so the ADA compliance comes on this side. I couldn't tell if that was steps or a ramp. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for making that presentation. I will mention that the architecture, the appearance of the architecture and elevations really is driven by this book, if you remember, from the conceptual site plan. It's this kind of this big guiding instrument which shows the east-west boulevard. It was always intended that there would be a two-story feel, although a two-story reality for retail purposes isn't something that is going to happen here from a market standpoint. But the presentation of it, the relationship, the sympathy with the compatibility with the Melford house itself was also an element that was called out in the design guidelines. So we've taken our cues from that, from the parapet walls to the brick to the color of the roof or the pavilion, et cetera. So really think it is going to be a nice, harmonious, complementary aspect to the overall feel, with the Melford house still being at the highest point in the project, and it's going to get. This is going to get its inspiration from that historic setting. So that being said, we appreciate your consideration of the request. I did mention earlier that we do have some minor condition changes that I'd like to hand out. And I've already given Mr. Stevens a copy. I think I have them up here. If I could approach and just hand it on.
Is this regarding the crosswalks? Sir?
Yes. This is the one. It's numbers 2. So the first one, this is picking up on what Mr. Stevens said, and regarding adding dimensions to compact spaces. And that's important because this is designed as a compact development. It's meant to, one, reduce the amount of vehicles necessary, because there's office use, residential use, retail use, where people will take multiple trips and be able to walk more often than necessary. But given that it's a compact development, development's close to the street, there's a lot of pedestrian interaction, we want to be able to not just have a bunch of surface paving. So one way you help meet your parking demand, because tenants will have parking needs, but not cover everything with that, is with pavement, is that you go to a certain amount of compact spaces. Now, the Prince George's County parking schedule allows for up to 33% of your spaces to be compact. What's unique here, and a traditional compact space is 8 feet by 16.5 feet by code. What we have the ability to do here is actually have something that's less than the parking standard for a standard space, but bigger than a compact space. And there's opportunities for that here in this project. So that's why it's important to mark in here on condition 2A on the first sheet of this revised condition sheet to state that all compact spaces with a dimension of 8 feet by 16.5 feet shall be marked in the field with a C on the pavement surface of each space. We may have spaces that are 9 feet wide, but they're good. They can fit a normal sized vehicle, but they're less than the standard, so they are technically compact, but they don't fall to the minimum compact space which the county ordinance would be. And we don't necessarily want to mark them with a C because we want to encourage all folks to use them and not just, sometimes you see a compact space and you're just like, oh, I can't go here, I can't go here. Other people see a compact space and they'll park a Suburban in it. But we feel that our less than standard spaces are able to accommodate larger vehicles, and they're only compact by definition because they're less than the standard dimensions in the county ordinance. So this basically true compact spaces in terms of the ordinance, this would require that marking a C. Ms. Trask, as you mentioned with the signage, we're open for those spaces to have some appropriate signage to inform you what the C means. So that's a change that I think we could accept if the board would endorse as such. The main change is condition 3. This deals with, again, the paver crosswalks. There's ample crosswalks leading along the east-west boulevard. We've had a lot of discussion with staff, and Frank and I have gone and had some discussions about this, and they felt that there's opportunities, at least 2 spots, to have full spaces. If we could quickly go back to the rendered plan, so I just want to point out the 2 spaces. So it would be, if you could point out that one right there, that's fine. If you could show Street B, which is there, and that intersection, right at those four legs of crosswalks. These conditions require them to be brick pavers or pavers, and we'll accept that condition. But in order to pave that entire intersection with brick pavers is problematic. We think that's too much in terms of aesthetics. East-West Boulevard is really the main artery. It's carrying more than just vehicles and pedestrians. It's also carrying the bulk of the utilities through this compact project, because it's not a huge land area, it's very dense, and because of that we have our dry utilities, our wet utilities, they're going to be co-located in the street. Why do I bring that up? Well, in order to do pavers, you have to basically cast them in a concrete base. So that's the subsurface. Then you place the pavers on top of it. If you were to decorate that one intersection in particular, Street B and the East-West Boulevard, if you could point to that with the arrow, I mean, that's probably equivalent to, you probably could get about 10 to a dozen normal-sized crosswalks through that area. I mean, it's a big area. Because utilities are going through that street, if any work had to be done on those utilities, you're going to have to basically break up the paver area, and that's a large amount of paver and material to disrupt in order to do normal maintenance. It is a public right-of-way. That would be, public maintenance. We think that one reason is a very important reason not to have those 2 intersections completely covered in pavers. Secondarily, and I think more importantly, from a safety standpoint, while we do have an encouraging interaction between pedestrians and the surrounding uses, this is the main artery into the Melford Town Center. There is going to be a significant amount of vehicular traffic at regulated speeds. There, the very nature of it, narrower streets, street trees, it's going to be a calming effect, but there are going to be a lot of vehicles. I've personally experienced, and perhaps you have too, taking my family to an area that I want my kids to stay in the crosswalk. When you use the materials that they're in the entire intersection, I think that inspires some brave children or other people perhaps to use the entire intersection as the crosswalk. It is not the intent of this, and I don't. From a safety standpoint, the applicant feels that it's more appropriate to have controlled, curtailed pavement areas that delineate where you should be crossing, as opposed to having a very large expanse of that same material, which could be misinterpreted and usually is when you see that differentiation of material to walk across the entire intersection. Thirdly, from an aesthetic standpoint, we feel that once you're in the community, those really, that much paver really isn't announcing anything incredible. You know, there is really, you're coming in, it's not the entrance. You're actually in, you're either at the one entrance into the back parking lot of the commercial buildings for 1, 2, 3, and 5, or you're coming into the intersection for really to go into the restaurant area. And it really isn't announcing anything that would, I think, warrant such a use of materials, such an expansive use of materials. If we could go forward to the one slide. Yes, here's an example of what that second intersection would be. This is what we're proposing, and as you can see, I think it has, you know, it appropriately treats from an aesthetic standpoint, from a functionality standpoint, the interaction with the pedestrians. It encourages people to cross in the right spots, but at the same time, it does beautify the area. It is consistent with the hardscape that's surrounding. If that entire intersection was covered with pavers, I think that, again, invites inappropriate crossings. Imagine the utilities that are running under that street that would have to be worked on, and the impact on maintenance of that area if it was that different material. And then from aesthetically, I think it's overuse of the material. So from our standpoint, we'd really like to see it as proposed with the staff's recommendation that it be a paver material. We'll agree to that. We were considering a stamped product. There's some newer stamped products that, from a wearability, usability standpoint, that we think, you know, would work really well here. But the staff would like to see pavers. We still would like to have the discussion with them to see if it could be something other than pavers. And between now and the council, we'll have that discussion. But for our purposes tonight, we really think that pavers in the area that we've denoted for our crossings is the most appropriate treatment.
So as shown is what you're proposing?
Essentially, yes. Yes, as shown is what we're proposing. And because of that, the condition 3C and the Romanet 1 and 2 would be deleted, because that's the condition that calls out specific intersections to be entirely covered in pavers. And for the reasons I stated, we don't feel that that's appropriate. So we would ask that condition, the board endorse the deletion of that condition. And then finally, condition 7C, this is likely an oversight on my part, but it should say all A-frame signs, and those are the signs that kind of sit, you know, where somebody's announcing what today's special is, if it's a restaurant or some other item. It should say signs, and then at the end of that, it should say appurtenances. There's just a slight misspelling, so we just corrected that spelling. So that's really a non-substantive change, but other than that, you know, we appreciate your consideration of this request. We encourage your support for this application with the conditions as suggested to be amended, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions, and our team is here to do the same, so thank you.
Mr. Stevens, have you had a chance to see this before today?
Yes, we saw it earlier.
And your thoughts?
Well, our thoughts are, we're okay with the change to condition 2A and the change to condition 7C. But we still believe that as we stated in our staff report, condition 3C should not be deleted for the reasons we've stated, that in the report, that you know, we're trying to achieve a high quality of aesthetics at these intersections, the two intersections that we've identified in 3C. The opportunity to provide a long-term durability, low-maintenance feature through those intersections. They will be, we believe, highly trafficked in terms of vehicular traffic and pedestrian traffic crossing both sides of East-West Boulevard. We've had experience with intersections in the Northridge community that are fully, have full pavers in them. They've held up very well. You know, one opportunity may be to kind of provide a contrast between the crosswalks and the middle of the intersections would be to perhaps install pavers in a different color, add a second or third color to the intersection to kind of really identify that from the crosswalks themselves, and perhaps maybe some signage that indicates exactly where the crosswalks are, so people can actually cross in the crosswalks and not cut through the intersection. But we stand by what we have in our report.
Okay, just for my clarification, these will be city-maintained streets or county-maintained streets?
No, they're city.
They're city-maintained, so the city is going to maintain the
Those will be in the
streets.
city, the rights-of-way of Melford, East-West Boulevard, and Road B are all within the city, under city jurisdiction.
All right, thank you, sir. Any questions?
No, the only question or comment I would have to that is, Frank, that is, do you see that being more expensive, creating an increased expense for the city to maintain?
It would be more expensive, but they wouldn't have to be maintained as frequently or as often if it was, say, asphalt or perhaps something else, like the paved intersection, the paver block intersections in Northridge, I believe lasted more than 20 or 25 years. And we just went back and redid those recently.
Could I just add a couple? We're not opposed to the material, the lasting aspects of a paver, but in terms of maintenance and costs, really what we're coming at is the bulk of your utilities are in the street, and that's somewhat of a unique setup. And Melford Town Center is a unique setup. So as these intersections are treated, we want to give special care and consideration that utilities fail. Sometimes access needs to be made. I think your greatest expense, is if you have to get to those lines, going through an intersection that's covered in a paver material, which is significantly more expensive to remove and replace because of its concrete base that it sits in, and it's difficult. From an aesthetic standpoint, we can agree to disagree. What we don't disagree about is the contrasting pavers. We can have something that clearly identifies the crosswalk, but we want people to cross in the crosswalk. We don't want to make it too busy and have too many colors of different pavers. I think that compounds what we think is a diminution in aesthetics by doing something like that. So I respect Frank, and he doesn't. I respect Frank and the planning department, but we feel quite strongly that what we've proposed is well thought out and makes the most sense long term.
In relation to the utilities, you couldn't just bump it back 10 feet?
No, there's no space for that. This is a tight, compact, sustainable project. In order to get the densities and the intensities of uses, we had to take basically 90 plus usable acres and put a lot of things there, go vertical. But in order to do that, we had to share, co-locate these important utilities in public right-of-way outside of where a traditional PUE would be, which would be 10 feet back from the curb or somewhat in an area.
And
So
who is it that would be responsible for the utilities? The city?
it'll be a public utility, so there'd be an easement granted to them. So
Okay.
that would be a public maintenance obligation.
Mr. Rogers?
To continue my question, so from a cost-benefit analysis, we're weighing cost for maintenance purely against aesthetics. Is that correct, Frank?
Sorry?
So it's from a cost-benefit analysis, we're weighing the cost of maintenance or potential maintenance against aesthetics.
Well, the cost of the maintenance, projected over the life of these pavers would be, wouldn't be as expensive as if it was, for example, asphalt, where you'd have to go back more frequently and provide some patches or overlays or something along that line. But as far as the aesthetics go, we feel that the materials, the different colors of the materials really enhance the quality of the project. There's a lot of hard surface and surfacescapes that are being proposed through this project in terms of the walls, the building materials that are used, and even the sidewalk, the scorching in the sidewalk. Not that's going to be made of pavers or colored materials, but all of those things kind of add up to achieve a higher level of quality of the project, and we think that what we're recommending would continue that thought.
Okay, so in the event of a utility failure, would there be a shared cost between the city and the utility company and the replacement of the disrupted surfaces?
I'm not sure how that would work out. I guess it would depend on what the utilities are that fail, whether they're gas or electric or cable or something like that, or if it's water and sewer and WSSC or city. But I think that's something that would probably be dealt with at the time of, if it's an emergency, some type of emergency like that.
So generally speaking, when utilities fail, and let's say it's a water line break or a sewer problem, and WSSC has to go into the street to fix it, do they repair the street, or do they just repair the broken pipe, and the city shares the cost of repairing the road?
No, it's my understanding
They normally repair the street as well, but I've seen sections where they've put and replaced water lines. In my own neighborhood, they've done that, and the patch job is clearly a patch job. I think Frank has made my point in a way maybe unintended. We've used a lot of high-quality treatments through the hardscapes, the walls, the setbacks, the materials. That's already present here. But if you start cutting that up, and if the utility is obligated to do it, you're going to have to match the paver, and you're going to be reliant on perhaps a third party to come in and do as good a job as it was originally set. And I really think that's too much of a risk for, at least in our interest, of keeping the quality up on the project, when really what you have here is not just adequate, it's more, it really uses the best materials in the appropriate location. So I think it's maybe too much of a good thing, and we really would urge you to reconsider pursuant to our recommended condition change.
Would the developer be amenable to just leaving it as staff has recommended?
No, we would like to recommend that the full, those two intersections not be fully covered in pavers.
And your interest in that is that it's more effective or more cost-effective for the city?
Our interests are threefold. The first one and most important one is it encourages pedestrian crossings at the appropriate locations on this main boulevard in the Melford Town Center by not having confusing materials that would lead somebody perhaps in the intersection across it perpendicularly. That could very well happen. Secondarily, we feel that from a maintenance standpoint, whether the city's doing it or the utilities, it's a cost. It's an added cost. These materials aren't cheap, and they're set in a concrete base, which in and of itself is an additional cost over just an asphalt base. And there is going to be at some point some maintenance of utilities in this public in the right of way. When you disturb that, we're all running the risk, particularly us, the most vested persons who are owning the retail component, the residences, that what gets replaced there doesn't look as good as what would have originally gone there. So we have a concern about maintenance of the aesthetics of it. And then the third is, in those locations, we don't feel it's really announcing anything that would warrant such an overuse of that material. You're already into the project, you're past the main entrance, you're past the entrance signage, you're past, but you're well on your way towards the plaza, which is farther down. That's the next big special feature, and then beyond that, it's the future amphitheater is the next special feature. So I appreciate what the staff is trying to emphasize, but for those 3 reasons, we feel that this is the best alternative to providing appropriate crossings in this section.
Any other questions? Mr. Byrd? I'll come down.
Yeah, I kind of understand your viewpoint and your perspective, but it seems a little odd to me that you're kind of scraping and sharpening your pencil on the pavers on the street when you're building. How much? The 5 buildings. How much square footage is that?
The 5 buildings is about 57,000.
Okay.
The first 3 are proposed here, and those are completely done hoping that tenants aren't signed up for those. So, I mean, there's a significant investment by the company to build these with the hopes that the mixed use will generate tenants. So there's a lot of, it's not just the pavers. This is a significant investment overall by
No,
by
I
the
understand
ownership.
that. I do. But I mean, I think you're basing your decision points and your triggers on uncertainty of the future. In my opinion, again, just my opinion. I think that if that's something that aesthetically, because people are ground level, whether in their vehicles or they're walking on ground level, and that kind of thing that the architect very, very eloquently presented were buildings that have second-story appendages that have no function whatsoever.
Which at a cost, which
Right,
we're-
exactly, that's what I'm saying.
which we're doing. Yeah.
Okay, right. So I think I guess the point I'm trying to make is how can you have a budget or cost analysis for buildings that have faux second stories with no functionality whatsoever, but then you don't want to, or you're a little reluctant, I won't say don't want to, but you're a little reluctant into establishing pavered
It's a
crosswalks.
fair comment. And again, the 2-story appearance is mandated by the design guidelines. So,
Okay.
so we're compelled to do that.
All right, thank you.
And we're
I didn't know that.
to do the best we can. We're very pleased and proud of what we're proposing. In terms of cost benefit analysis, I mean, our main reason is pedestrian safety. That's our main reason for why we don't want the entire intersection covered in a same paver or even a complementary paver, because people are going to deviate from that pedestrian path, and this is going to be a high vehicle in the sense of, this will be a main artery into the Melford Town Center. That I think it raises the incidence of accidents, and that's our main reason. Our second reason is just maintenance of the area because of those utility locations in the street. There's a high probability that at some point that's going to have to be taken up. The pavers may last 50 years, but if you have to break it and lift it up to get to those utilities, what goes back in there is that may look terrible, it may look fine, it's going to be more expensive to work on. I think coupled to those 2 reasons, I just don't think it makes sense to do it. So that's our main reason. Pavers in that area isn't going to break the project. That's really not. I don't want to. If I implied that, I didn't mean to. But we think the safety and overall longevity of what's going to happen in that intersection, what it'll look like after it's repaired, is too big of a risk for us.
How is stamped concrete going to present a more safety-oriented establishment versus pavers?
No, we're not disputing the pavers. When I mentioned stamped concrete, that was going to be in the same location.
Okay.
It was a different type of material. We felt wears just as well and can be maintained if it had to be broken to get to a utility line. That's much easier to repair than putting pavers back in place.
And you're talking about sustainability and maintainability, but then you also mentioned safety, because you talked about your little kids, you don't want your
That's
children
right.
to walk and deviate from the crosswalk. So from your standpoint, how are, say a stamp pane or just regular concrete, how is that safer for your small children?
It's a different. We're not. Again, if we were to do stamped concrete, which right now we're agreeing to pavers, it would be in the same location. So that has nothing to do with the safety argument.
Okay.
It's when you take whatever material is going to be and you cover the entire intersection, from that crosswalk to the other crosswalk. That's when the pedestrian safety issue gets elevated. We think that's too much. But in terms of whether it's stamped concrete or pavers, well, right now, we're not disputing that we can do pavers, we'll do pavers. We just don't want it covering the entire intersection.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Trask? Mr. Scots?
Yeah, Counselor, I got a serious problem with your amendments here. You're taking in consideration, it looks like, your consideration is basically to alleviate condition 3C?
Yes.
All right, well, why are you basically deleting section D without referencing section D? What I'm coming up with is, if this, the way it's written now, you'd have A and B unaffected, then section D would become section C,
That's right.
and it would read between buildings 1 and 2 and between buildings 2 and 3, the width of the proposed trail linking east-west boulevard. That's how I'm reading the amended language.
We're not, I apologize. I should have had the whole condition. I typed this myself, so, and I'm a terrible typist, but D
Explains it.
D remains in its entirety. We're very excited about the opportunity to have that connection from the linear park down to the trail
Well,
road.
it can't be with its entirety because,
Well, it would become C. It would become C.
okay, but like I said, basically what you're doing is that if you read this, the width of the proposed trail linking east-west boulevard, then everything else in D is alleviated. Because basically what you're doing is you're deleting the language as contained in D and listing it as part of C2.
No.
Yeah, it took me a couple seconds to kind of realize what was going on.
Well, I'm not sure. The requirement in D is to provide an 8-foot access trail down to the lake. And we will do that. We've shown a smaller width, but we'll widen it to 8 feet. And that's not going to change.
Okay, so you're gonna have to insert the 8 feet somewhere because right now it's not really reflective of that. It's just saying a width. It doesn't give you what the proposed width is.
It said, well, it's, at least on my copy, it says the width of the proposed trail linking the east-west boulevard with the existing trail around the nearby stormwater management pond shall be shown on the detailed site plan to be a minimum of 8 feet.
Right, but you deleted it.
That's the part that's crossed out.
Is it? Oh, my goodness gracious. Oh, you caught me. See, I told you I typed this myself. And
I've been reading too much legislation from Annapolis the last 3 weeks.
that,
so I'm catching crap like this, excuse the language.
all right. Well, that aptly describes it in terms of the quality of, that was not the intent. If you look on page 15 of
Yeah,
the.
I mean, the bottom line is, Council, I know what you're trying to get to if you just revise the language.
I will, thank you. I will.
Old guys like me that start looking at this start getting really confused in the first place.
I was,
Good
I'm
catch.
sorry, I'm embarrassed. Yes,
There's no reason for this.
thank you.
All human. Blame it on the computer.
All right, Mr. Trask?
Mr. Antonetti, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about building number 4 being the restaurant building,
Yes, ma'am.
and 1 was going to be the food store. Which building was that?
That would be building 5. Nick, if you could go to the rendered plan. Building 5, the most southernmost building in,
Okay,
and,
okay. All right. I was wondering why so much parking, but,
It's allowable.
yeah.
Grocery store.
And then, I was looking at the, when Mr. Lusky did his presentation, the street width was kind of narrow, and you spoke of that as a traffic calming measure. Is that throughout the project, or just in the retail areas?
it's throughout the, yes, it's throughout the Melford Town Center project. If you've been on Melford Boulevard, that opens up a bit more towards the employment uses, so the existing roads around it will more or less remain very similarly situated. But yes, it's a deliberate treatment for the roads throughout the Melford Town Center, and it will continue beyond this.
And I was curious, for the retail, this one and the west one, what sort of, I guess, hours of operation are you looking at for the businesses that you're
Well, it is the MXT zone, so one of the purposes of the MXT zone is to encourage a 24-hour
it?
environment. It is. Now, that doesn't mean the retail's open for 24 hours, and, you know, but this is a component to kind of allow vitality beyond, you know, a normal 9 to 5. So a restaurant hours are, you know, 10 o'clock. If you have, you know, a nice sit-down restaurant, I can't specifically commit to 1 hour, but I imagine that will be kind of the lifespan for a restaurant. I think hopefully a food store would be around 10 o'clock as well, where you get most of your foot traffic or locals coming back from work or what have you. So something similar to a kind of a neighborhood of retail hours.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further? Mr. Rogers? No. Anyone else? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Do we have anybody signed up to speak, Mr. Stevens?
No, sir, nobody signed up for the public hearing.
Sure, come on up. No, you need to come up here, sir. If you're going to make a comment, you have to come up. Otherwise, you're not going to make a comment. So please state your name and your address for the record, please. Good evening.
My name is Jim Bell. I live on Beachfront Lane. And I need to make a comment about the pavers because the pavers, if you look back in the budget, the city budget, the taxpayers are paying a significant amount of money to maintain those Northridge pavers. So it's something that the city really should not have, or the citizens really should not have to be paying for that significant amount of money just to replace those pavers at intersections. And it is expensive. So it's a lot more expensive than replacing asphalt where you're not just resurfacing a very specific section. When you resurface asphalt, you're doing the entire street. So it's a very significant delta in the cost, and I think you really need to go back and look at that. And I think when I raised this issue with Joe Minert before, his response was that they were looking at different ways of doing those intersections, and that they weren't proposing using the pavers. They were doing something more like the stamped concrete that they were suggesting. So that's that I was told. But the cost is significant. You need to go back to the city budget and see what the cost is to maintain those pavers.
Thank you. Anyone else that did not sign up that wants to speak? No? All right. Any questions, any follow-up? Mr.
No
Rogers?
question to follow up.
Yes, sir.
It's ready for discussion.
Okay, yeah, then let's move into discussion.
I think that the project overall, I mean, it's good, that the presentations were good. I'm just kind of not sure how we treat an issue where, you know, the developer and the city are at loggerheads in
Right.
terms of resolving the issue of the pavers. Whereas it's obviously going to be a more expensive thing to do for the city if the city has to maintain it, and I don't know the benefit of having to spend the extra money when in fact what we really want to do is just identify crosswalks. And so to, you know, pave the, you know, in the in-between area with pavers is, I don't know if that's a wise use of the citizens of Bowie's tax dollars.
That's what you're proposing, correct? The team is proposing pavers on the crosswalk,
Yes.
but then outside the crosswalk would be
In the
some
middle.
other type of, okay.
In the middle, that square in the middle of the crosswalks.
Right, it's not gonna be paved.
And is that the case at the
That's
other
what the
intersections as
city
well?
wants
They
to
don't
do,
want to
though.
use pavers.
Is that the case at the
That's
other
what the city
intersections
wants.
as well, with the crosswalks?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I got you. Yeah, I understand.
Crosswalk, city said,
See the,
pavers.
Yep,
that's gonna be asphalt.
That's just.
right.
City
Yeah.
said make this pavers.
And then to the left?
I'm sorry, you said
To the
asphalt in
same.
the center, just the crosswalks will be.
Asphalt, right where the little hand is. is
Yeah.
the other intersection.
And then what about the one to the west?
Asphalt, pavers.
But aesthetically wise, and just from like a intangible type of, you know, warm and fuzzy feeling, would not that whole center section, as well as a crosswalk being installed using pavers, I know, so council brought up the idea about safety, and some folks may get confused between what's a crosswalk, what's not. If you use different color pavers in the center section,
Yeah.
contrary or contrasting, or I guess maybe even complementary to the actual pavers inside the crosswalk, would that not naturally, as we were talking about, you know, aesthetics and, you know, heights of signage and so on and so forth, wouldn't that aesthetically already lead someone to walk down?
I come from Toronto, and there's a couple main streets up there where they've done that, and you know what happens? People do this. They go straight across that way. Instead of doing that, they all think it's one big giant playground,
Okay.
because it kind of looks like one.
Even though they're different
And
contrasting
they- yeah,
colors.
And they say, oh, it's a giant whatever thing, and they go
But everything's
diagonally
pavers.
across it,
Okay.
and that's a problem. So
Wouldn't that
they're
happen
stop-
naturally,
they're
though?
stopping doing it now.
If you had asphalt there,
It could happen
people don't
naturally.
cut
It
the
would
corners,
happen-
just
Spray
people just
painted.
wanna cut the corners.
It could happen naturally, but what I think we don't want to do is encourage it to happen
All right.
that way.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's just, you know, I don't know how where the resolution is in that, with the city and developer.
I think we should, make a recommendation.
Right. Yeah.
Who are the rest of the folks from your team? I'm sorry.
Well, on the far right, we have one of our partners.
Okay,
The man in red ties with St. John, ladies with St. John, the
Okay.
engineer in the pink tie with Bowler, behind Bowler,
Okay.
our architects. It's the whole team.
the gentleman with the red tie was raising his hand earlier. I don't, do you,
You were mentioning about, the voting.
could you please step up to the podium, just state your name for the record, please, sir?
I'm Ken Finley with St. John Properties, and I just was going to chime in on your question about loading for the retail strip buildings.
Okay.
On St. John Properties, other retail buildings, when they get under lease with particular tenants in there, they have a stipulation that you have to come early in the morning before the cars line up. And
Oh,
you use
okay.
it that time. So we don't designate loading spaces, they just come at that time because they have to.
Got it.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we will move into making a recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, you have, okay.
Question for
Mr.
staff.
Rogers.
Yeah, question for staff. Could we recommend acceptance of the staff's report with the amendment made by St. John for the elimination of the full paver in the crosswalk sections?
Yes, you can, if that's what your thinking is, yeah, you can do that. You can, come up with an alternative condition, whether it's ours or the applicant's or some type of hybrid condition with the reasons for that condition, sure.
Well, among our fellow board members, I'd like to know, what are your feelings on that?
So I agree with the applicant that we should consider simply marking the crosswalks with the pavers and the rest be asphalt. I agree with that recommendation.
I'm leaning that way as well.
So,
That's two.
okay, so,
Mr. Scopes, your thoughts?
all right, well. We'll make a motion.
I would entertain a motion.
All right, I'll make the motion then that, get out my stuff. Mr. Chair, in the issue of Bowie Planning Advisory Board, number 18-03, Retail Village East at Melford Town Center, I move that we accept staff's recommendation with a revision as proposed by St. John for, while I find it, to accept their revision on 3C, I believe it is,
The removal.
the removal of the pavement, the pavers other than for the crosswalks themselves. So, in other words, pavers on the crosswalks themselves, not in the middle of the crosswalks. That's the motion.
Question, Mr. Chairman, what about the proposed revisions to conditions 2A and 7?
That needs to be included as well.
7C.
And 7C, right?
So are you
We would accept
including those in your motion as well?
We would accept those as well, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll accept those two, yes.
Okay, thank
So
you.
we would accept 2A, we'll accept the removal of 3C, and we'll accept the amendments in 7C.
Yes, that's the motion.
And all the other conditions that staff recommended, which they agreed to. And do I have a second?
I second the motion.
Second by Ms. Trass. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed is none, unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item is the approval of minutes from January 9th, 2018. And thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it. Good luck Monday. Do we have anybody that wants to approve as written, or do we,
I move that we approve as written.
do I have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? It's unanimous. Next business is the election of officers. At this time, I would like to nominate Mr. Michael Byrd to be the chair.
I second that nomination.
And then second by Ms. Trass. And for vice chair, I would nominate Mr. Terry Rogers.
I second that nomination.
And second by Ms. Trass. Mr. Stevens, do we vote on this, or?
Yes, I guess you can either, probably it'd be cleaner if you did them in separate motions.
There were separate motions? Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll stick with we'll start with the first one. So
Right.
the first one with the motion to make Mr. Byrd the chair. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. And for Mr. Terry Rogers as vice chair, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, none. It's unanimous.
Right, with Ms. Trice, second the motion on both motions.
Ms. Trask seconding the motion on both motions. So for the next meeting, we'll have Mr. Byrd as our new chair. Congratulations, sir.
Congratulations.
And Mr. Rogers as the vice chair. Congratulations, sir.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much, thank you very much, Krause.
Great. Well, and now a motion to adjourn? Unless we have next items coming up?
I'm not aware of anything coming up. If there is something on the horizon, we'll let you know. But I'm not aware of any variances.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn? Thank you. Good evening.